we are at 3 minutes past the hour, and we've got about 50% of our registrants here. So I think we're gonna kick it off if that works for everybody. We're all hydrated. We got water or something to keep us going throughout this hour.
Yep.
Cool. So quick housekeeping. Welcome to everyone that's tuned in. We are going to do about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how active the Q&A is throughout this session at the end. So as questions pop up, please drop them in either the Q&A or the chat, and we'll make sure to grab them. My name is Laura Patel. I lead Density's East Coast enterprise team, working predominantly with Fortune 500 companies to help them optimize their portfolios and enhance their workplace productivity. Today, I'm going to play a really small part of your midday entertainment, helping to lead a timely conversation on how leaders are approaching safe collaboration in the hybrid world. We invited 3 panelists to join us today to share their unique perspective across various markets, from technology solutions to design and furniture to Allison representing a multinational financial services firm. We're all planning for what's next and what a hybrid workplace may look like, and these folks really have the pulse of what's ahead. So to kick things off, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the discussion. I'm going to kick things over to you, Rocky, then we'll hot potato it to Allison, and then we'll finish off with Kylie.
That's great. Well, my name is Rocky Pop, and I manage the enterprise business for Envoy. We're a SaaS business based in San Francisco, and we have multiple offices in the world. And what we focus on is selling office applications to help companies welcome visitors, welcome packages into their offices, do things like employee screening during the COVID pandemic. We also do things like hot desking to help in the hybrid workplace. So essentially, our whole business is around the office and making it more efficient as well as more secure, both pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, which is certainly, changed a lot of our thinking about what type of products that we should be building and taking to market. And I'm excited to be here, so thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rocky. My name is Allison Kwiatkowski. I am the America's business partner for Deutsche Bank, which entails serving as the face of and overseeing all of the service lines under global real estate. So project delivery, transactions, engineering, client employee services, facilities. So aligning those service lines with the America's business strategy.
Thanks, Allison. My name's Kylie Roth, and I lead research at Knoll. Knoll's a workplace and office brand where we make furniture for the home and the office. We are constantly doing research to understand what's new and what's next, but also how we can build better environments for people.
Cool. So if we learned nothing else over the course of 2020, we learned that work does not have to happen in the office. We can all be moderately to highly productive, depending on how many distractions you have at home, by working from the comfort of our homes. And so with that in mind, it's kind of made me think about a few years ago, I heard Chris Kelly, the founder of Convene, speak at an event, and he talked about how his vision for the future of workplace was going to mirror more of what we saw on a college campus. You have the library when you need to do heads down work. You have the student commons when you want to collaborate. You've got the cafeteria if you just want to touch down and socialize. And when you hand in your paper at the end of the term, the professor doesn't care where you did the work. They just care that you got it done. And so there's sort of this mentality of like self-selecting and having different types of workplaces. That wasn't necessarily most workplace strategy prior to the pandemic, but it kind of seems as we start to look to the news and what we can expect as we head back to the office, that we're going to see a really radical change in how workplaces are established or radically accelerated from what some companies had planned over maybe their 5 to 10 year strategy. Allison, I want to kick things off with you just being on the end user side. I'm curious to hear your perspective on this first. I know Deutsche Bank made a decision to dramatically pivot your workplace concept pretty early in the pandemic. And I'm curious what that new workplace strategy looks like insofar as how you plan to attract your employees back to the office following the pandemic, now that they know they can just work from home and still do their jobs.
So we have a very different strategy and I guess challenge here at the bank because we're building a new headquarters at Columbus Circle. So we are rebranding the Time Warner Center as the Deutsche Bank Center. and we're starting moves in Q3 2021. So we are very much focused on the long game. At the same time, our America CEO is very entrenched in real-time data. She's on the New York Mayor's Council, and she is very close to COVID metrics. So every decision is real-time data-driven, putting employees first, but still maintaining our regulatory requirements. So it's made a very interesting situation for us. Regional management essentially asked staff if they'd be interested in coming back to the New York office. As far as our regional offices, right now, it's really just essential staff only. And for the New York office, which is our America's headquarters, if staff were not interested in coming back, last summer and especially now, we have told staff to stay home until we are done with our headquarters and to come back, new space, fresh start. And accordingly, once that decision was made, we launched a pretty tremendous internal and external communications and PR campaign. So whoever has connected to me on LinkedIn, I apologize because you have witnessed this. But we have regular video updates. We're posting videos. We have announcements from the CEO each week. And the strategy is to try to keep the excitement up with those people who are eager to come back, to basically make that, from now until Q3 next year seem much shorter, and to get them excited about what they're coming back to, as well as entice those who are less eager to come back, that in the new office and in our new headquarters, we can offer them something that they can't get at home. And it's delivered in a safe way. And, beyond just like best-in-class amenities and a modern work environment, it's continuously reinforced that we are one team, and we are stronger together and in person. So that's it. Similar to our peers, between now and Q3, we're looking at the hybrid work arrangements. We can't expect people to come back to return to the old way of working. People are demanding a different type of arrangement, but we're trying to come to a middle ground to both retain talent, but still, respect people's newfound kind of boundaries and what makes them feel comfortable to do their job and get their job done.
Maybe picking on financial services, but when people think about like really fantastic, cool, collaborative offices, they're thinking about, Facebook or Google. What about maybe how you guys had traditionally viewed your office spaces has shifted that may align you more with kind of those cool collaborative work environments that people are thinking of?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has fast forwarded the conversation that, a desk is just a desk and you can do work anywhere. So what can we offer in the office that you can't get? So we're looking at moving people towards more of like an agile software methodology. So having scrum spaces, having very flexible furniture, picking up a lot of the tech trends. We've actually also partnered with Google, which was announced last week. So we are trying to align the back end as well and all of our technology support. But I think we've realized that fail fast mentality, even in the financial world, is a good way to just innovate quicker. And I think the biggest thing is the bank is trying to demonstrate that we are a transparent organization. So nothing is more transparent than having everything posted and visible to other teams, and people can see, what you're doing and what you're working on and where you are. And that's definitely the way the bank is moving forward.
Rocky, Kylie, do you want to add anything to that before I move on?
We're obviously a much smaller company, but we've adopted some similar strategies. We have multiple offices. We have an office here in Kansas City. We have an office in San Francisco. We have an office in New York City. We're actually in development of a new facility in Denver. And so what we've learned through this scenario is that based on certain regions, there's different philosophies about how quickly people are willing to come back to work. Right. So, and a lot of that has to do with regulations. A lot of it has to do with just philosophy and sentiment of the population. So early on, we shut everything down. And what we found was that in Kansas City, there was employees were much more eager to come back to the office. And so, here in Kansas City, many employees were, and I managed the office in addition to my my enterprise sales duties. And I was getting daily, people asking questions. Hey, when can we come back? When can we reopen the office? But what was interesting is that, so that area was, the draw was faster. So more people wanted to come back faster in Kansas City. But even within that population, there was also variation. So, about half the team didn't want to come back to the office, and they were enjoying and actually liking the work from home more than others. And so what we adopted at that point was kind of early on, I'd say like June, July, we had adopted what I would consider kind of the new normal, which is this hybrid concept. So we opened the office, and we had social distancing in place, and we provided PPE to the employees that wanted to come to the office. We launched our own technology to do employee screening. So every morning before the people wanted to attend work at the office, they'd do an employee screening and attestation, making sure that they didn't have a fever, et cetera, and they would come in. And that's been really successful for us. Even today, after all these many months, still only about 60% or 70% of the employees will come to the office on a regular basis. So what we found is that, and the draw is what Allison said, is the amenities. And it's like, some people really want to be in an office and have those conference rooms and be able to sit at a single space and work face to face and do co-working. Some employees actually really like the fact that we provide free lunch, so they come to the office to some degree because that's how they can get that free lunch. So I would say we're seeing some interesting and similar things, just on a smaller scale, where there's big spread of regions, as well as within your own employee population, the sentiment about how fast people want to return to work and what things they expect when they come back.
And Rocky, to add to that, what we've seen in our surveys is people want to come back for their team. That's the number one reason. So similarly, we've pivoted, and it's like, how can we build an anchor around the team so that when people come back, they have their team, they're together, they feel that bonding, so that that time in between doesn't feel so long.
Yeah. I would say, and I'm going to try to answer some of the questions in my response here that we've been getting on the chat, but I would say we're seeing many of the same things with our own businesses and also with our clients. With having hundreds of conversations with clients. I think the conversation also, we started doing roundtables in April, and each week the conversation was different as we learned more and more and more. Obviously then it became kind of a monthly thing as we realized how long this was going to take. And back to Dave's question, how are clients shifting from like assigned to unassigned? In the very beginning of the pandemic, it was all about, I want my own personal space where no one can touch it. And now I think as we see clients thinking more about returning to the office environment, it's really much more about how can we share spaces, because people are going to be working, even when everyone comes back to the office, they're going to be working in a way that's truly, as we've been talking about here, hybrid. So we're seeing more and more of that. About what you've been talking about, Allison, about some of those strategies.
Yeah, it was interesting. If you think back to the beginning of the pandemic, there was sort of this villainizing of shared space, because there was a sentiment that it would mean that you were exposed to other people's germs, and so it would be less safe. And the reality is, when we have dedicated spaces, we fill them with our tchotchkes. I've been sitting at this desk for 2 days, and I have like my glasses and a lipstick and a lip chap and a whole bunch of other stuff, which makes it really hard to properly clean that space at the end of the night when the facilities team comes through. And so now we've had this shift where people are thinking more about those shared spaces, because not only collaboration, but it is actually way more efficient from a maintenance and facilities management standpoint. Allison, I'm curious to ping that back to you, because the question that came up in the chat that Kylie was alluding to is kind of like, is it going to be assigned or unassigned? And that's kind of a quick answer, but curious what you guys maybe were thinking before the pandemic and how that's evolved. And then Rocky, if you wanted to add anything after that too.
So we've always been trying to push a more shared kind of team anchored based workplace. And to be honest, in the financial services world, that's always been a challenge. That was the role I was hired for the bank in 2011, and between 2011 and 2019, the progress was pretty minimal. Now we have the opposite issue of people saying, I don't have to come back into the office full time. Like, why is the bank not supporting me to be able to go work from home or from my vacation house, or that, in an environment that really supports what I need to do, rather than come to an office full of distractions. So it's been very interesting to see how, the bank has pivoted, and we're signed onto a lease for our headquarters. So the footprint is set, but how that footprint is configured, now we're starting to look at. So I think moving forward, we'll definitely have more of a team-based unassigned work environment. It'll definitely not be a free-for-all. I think there's going to be structure to it, because in the financial world, there has to be structure to everything. But very similar, Laura, to what you said, we always talk about it as, as like a hotel. In order to be able to ensure that the space is clean and that it's being well managed, you need to have kind of that fresh start every day. So I think that would be, that's going to be definitely one of the big drivers to making people feel comfortable to come back in that unassigned environment. That said, there are certain business lines that, for regulatory reasons or technology, you'll never get them to desk share, and it kind of is what it is.
So maybe switching gears a little bit, Kylie, Knoll is obviously famous for your industry benchmarking and research, and you just came out last week with your report called Meeting Spaces to Support Hybrid Work Guide, in which you introduced the idea of a thriving workplace. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the learnings that are shared in that report?
Yeah, so the number one, we're having, as I mentioned, lots of conversations with clients, and the number one question that we're getting right now is truly about how to do hybrid meetings. And we put that philosophy under what we're calling the thriving workplace, which is really how to create a workplace that people want to be and that really supports the work that they need to do, and a workplace that kind of powers the ecosystem of hybrid work, because work, we used to say work, and obviously we meant we were in an office building, and now we say work, and it could be anywhere. So we're thinking about like that kind of switch to the nuances of that. But as I said, one of the challenges that we are experiencing right now is people really don't know some of the best practices for how to set up these kind of what we're calling digital meetings that kind of blend the best of the physical with the digital experiences that we're all talking about now. And we really tried to talk about kind of the three main strategies that come with that, like the space, thoughtfully planning spaces, like the table setup. Someone ask a question on like, what are we kind of seeing with product design, and obviously tables and the shapes, field of view, light reflectancy, because, we're all experiencing this, and, we're connected this way now and need to think about our colleagues on the other side of the screen. And also acoustics. If you can't see someone, that's a challenge. If you can't hear someone, that's like a no-go. You just can't have a meeting that way. So understanding those aspects. And then also, the technology that can support those different things within the meetings and how we can collaborate. And then also protocols. I mean, Allison mentioned that one of the things that they're really working on is that kind of change strategy. So setting up the right protocols that can help people understand what are good and bad and the procedures and the processes, and try to help us all work together to kind of create these great environments and support people that may not be in the room. Because I think one of the things that many companies are experiencing now is most people maybe aren't in the office. So we're collaborating like this, where we each get our 2-inch piece of square. That obviously changes when 5 people are in the room and 5 people are out of the room. So how do you kind of create that equality across all 10 people in that meeting and kind of keep them connected? So thinking about what happens when the people aren't in the room and you don't get that fear of missing out.
It's interesting, Kylie, because that's one of the things we've seen a challenge of. People have enjoyed being fully work from home when they know everyone else is as well. And now when we start to bring people back, it's like you have to bring people back in cohorts, because if it is the split, it definitely has an impact on the culture. There are things that happen, once the meeting wraps up. So it's how do you work the hybrid work environment where it's so tied to those teams, and that people still feel, it's a level playing field.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge that we're going to see. We talked about this a little bit earlier when we were talking right before the call, was the culture. How do you kind of keep that cultural connection? And I know you're talking about that, Allison, about like, when people aren't there, because the meeting that happens after the meeting sometimes is more important than the things that happen in the meeting.
That's actually, so, and Kylie, you mentioned this on a previous call, which I thought was really insightful, which is hybrid work is actually awesome. It provides flexibility. It allows for better work-life balance. The number one casualty from hybrid work is culture, whether you're trying to build it or maintain it. So I guess just kind of digging into this topic a little bit more, how in a virtual world have you adapted to increase transparency and enhance engagement? Because I'm curious how there may be some lessons learned or best practices from that can help us as we carry into this new hybrid, to your point, Allison, where maybe half of the people are coming back into the office and the other half are tuning in from home. What have been some of those learnings? I'm throwing it out there to the world. Whoever wants to have it.
Oh, Kylie, do you want to answer first?
No, go ahead, Rocky.
Yeah, I was going to say, to some degree, I mean, I'll talk a little bit about our experience here. And part of it, I think, is informed by the fact, that we have several offices already, and they're smaller because we're a smaller company. And so, even pre-pandemic, we to some degree are like built from a technology standpoint and from a spaces standpoint. So each one of our offices has a full Zoom setup, a big screen, and has great audio capabilities. And so we got really used to, even before the pandemic, and actually I would say, this company's done a really good job with that aspect of making these spaces open and also I would say geared towards collaboration across geographies. Mm-hmm. And so what we would see is we also had a pretty strong work from home culture prior to that. And so, it was not uncommon that we would have, 2 or 3 people in a conference room in San Francisco, 2 or 3 people in a conference room in Kansas City, and then someone dialing in from home. So we were able to continue to collaborate effectively because people were just used to it. I think that's the big difference is if you're not used to it, there's almost like that you have to get comfortable and get used to that environment. But the things that we do to mitigate the challenge of not being, in close proximity or being in a room is we also do a lot of communication on Slack and email. We also, do a lot of video content from our own management team, and we'll record every meeting. And that's whatever meeting happens, we record them and we post them. So if you're not in that meeting that happened after, if you have access to it, then you can at least see, what happened in that session. And then we also do what we call, I would say like team building exercises, and they're really more like planned, where, every couple of weeks we'll do just like a virtual bingo where everyone gets together and we make sure that we're trying to build that community even across geographies. So I'd say like the thing that we found is the setup is extremely important. And I think it's Kylie that you mentioned, you got to make sure that the amenities in the room lend themselves so that the people at home aren't disadvantaged, so they can hear, so they can see. If there's whiteboards, they need to be visible to the camera, and then beyond that, it's finding areas outside of those meetings to also have people have connectivity with one another, so that they can have those almost like water cooler types of conversations that you don't get, but in a virtual world. So I mean that's been our experience, is to try to marry the technology with other opportunities for these people to spend time with each other and build bonds.
Yeah, I think we're approaching it from like 2 different angles. There's the technology side and how to set up the space, but also the people side of like that cultural question, right? Like, so the technology side, testing new cameras that maybe have a more casual feel, capture more of the field of view, 360 cameras, 180 cameras, like, and new microphones and things. But also, back to your true question, I think, Laura, about the people, this is exhausting. I don't know about you, but like being on Zoom is exhausting. I took a vacation last week only to ask that I only had 3 Zoom meetings a week, or 3 Zoom meetings a day. I just wanted to be off of Zoom. I was happy to work. But it's like, understanding your team and when they're experiencing too much of this, but also making sure that you're celebrating the small things. Like if you used to have the silly things, if you used to do the birthday candles together, how do you try to recreate some of those? And maybe it's not everyone gets together, but can you send them a cupcake? Can you do something that's like, it's still recognizing that you're people at the end of the day and that they're coming together. We know that some of the research is that people stay at companies is because they have a best friend at work. So it's really trying to foster those connections individually too. Like, again, when you're on a Zoom of 20 people, it's very different when you're in a room with 20 people because you can have those side conversations. So I'd like some of the things that you're doing too, Rocky. I think those are interesting.
At the bank,
I'm sorry. Cut you off.
Sorry, the bank, between COVID and all the focus on DEI, kind of creating a perfect storm, leadership had a very interesting response. I think they realized that like on the team level, people felt engaged, but as a larger company of, 9,000 people, if you include our contractors in the Americas, we needed to do more. So they've set up a series of leadership top-down engagement, so like weekly open door sessions and CEO videos and that sort of thing. But one that has been particularly interesting, Laura, to your question around transparency and enhanced engagement, was our CEO set up, they call it Idea Box, and it's an intranet site where people can post any idea that they have about how to improve our company and tag it to a particular team. So they could tag it to finance, facilities, HR, etc. Who they tag it to has to have a representative to respond to say, this is the budget it would cost. This is why we can and can't do it. This is the team required. And if they move forward, the person that suggests the idea has to be on the implementation team. But the interesting part is everything's public. So people can vote. So as more people vote for an idea, it kind of bubbles up to the top and gains more attention and kind of puts pressure on leadership of why they can or can't do this thing. So it's very interesting because now every decision the bank makes that impacts staff, now everything's out there. And because it's so highly encouraged by leadership, there is like nothing that is taboo. So it's, as far as like from a company-wide view of transparent engagement, it's completely changed the culture of the bank and the role people feel that they have now in the future of the decisions within the Americas. So it's been very interesting, and I don't think that would have happened if life were kind of usual. And it has just completely revolutionized, the role of each employee because now they feel like they are a stakeholder. So it's been very interesting.
Stuff like that can flop hard without the right leadership. And you said leadership like multiple times. It's the same thing with, you hear about these tech companies who have unlimited vacation, but then none of the leadership takes vacation. And so as a result, none of the staff feel that they can either. And so there's this real trickle down of people. Yes, you have this really cool idea box, but unless, to your point, people feel really empowered and it's like something the leadership's excited about and encouraging, it never really takes off. So it's also kind of a nod to your culture.
And if you don't respond, a member of the CEO's team will personally email you to be like, I've seen that this idea was tagged to you 4 days ago and you are yet to explain why like you can't move forward or can move forward. Like, please respond today. So it's strongly enforced.
Like Allison wants nuts and almonds in the cafeteria when she comes back to work.
You should see some of the requests we get. That would be an easy one.
My question in regard to that in that program is like, was there resistance from pockets of both within leadership to the idea? And I mean, even after once it rolled out, and I would imagine some of the requests you get it could be outlandish, right?
So I think the bank is, pushing so hard this transparent culture that if there was resistance, like that's kind of not welcomed right now in like the way the bank is trying to change how they run themselves. So it's been very interesting. Now we are trying to launch like similar ideas for our headquarters, like naming rooms or restaurants in the cafeteria or that kind of thing. So you definitely get some of the wild ones. So we've learned how to handle that from a PR perspective.
Well, I think that's, Allison, you bring up I think it's a really cool idea, one. But two, I mean, we talk about this a lot in change management. Change done to you is very different than change done by you. And even if you don't do everything with the ideas, people feel heard and they know that their thoughts are being taken seriously. And then you give them a reason why it can't happen. So
or why it can. That's what's been interesting, because now that person who just threw out some wild idea, now they are the head of the task force to make that happen. And it's just powerful. It's been very cool. And if you vote, you then can also volunteer when you vote to also be on the team. So now we have these like little grassroots efforts popping up. It's been really interesting.
So a common theme that keeps bubbling up on the chat today, which I am surprised to see, but actually was a topic that we had planned on covering, was The responsibility of employers has actually evolved a lot over the last year, and questions around like things like daycare support and transportation to work when people don't want to take, mass transit and parking stipends, all of a sudden are front and center in conversations around employee enablement and productivity, kind of under this guise of workplace, with the workplace extending through to our living rooms. And so this in turn has raised questions around the evolving role of real estate teams in supporting these initiatives that stretch beyond the typical, office construct. I'm curious what each of your experiences have been with these growing pains, like amid the pandemic, and how that's going to maybe evolve how your companies look to address them as people do move back to a more normal being in the office or whatever the hybrid model looks like. So the questions that have come up on the chat are like, what do you think about, companies providing daycare, seeing as there may be issues now with if kids are sick, not being able to go to school, helping parents a little bit more with flexibility at home, things like the stipend if people don't want to take public transit because there's still some concerns around that. Like, how are your companies addressing that?
I would say we're having more conversations with clients about should they be offering health care, childcare, providing facilities. I think a lot of what I think has been interesting about the pandemic is like everything's on the table, right? Like it's just kind of opened up, like what are the conversations that companies should be having and what should they provide? I don't know. I think companies are most of the companies that we're talking to are still have feelers out for what that is. But one of my colleagues the other day was mentioning she had a conversation with the client, and I thought this was really interesting, where the head of real estate is now also the head of HR. So to your point, there's the space side of the conversation, and then there's the people side of the conversation, and they're putting those together because they realize the importance of how in this environment, it's about people, and then the space is there to support the people and how they're going to work and navigate that. And is childcare included? How do you provide a stipend for either technology or furniture or the tools that people need to work at home or work wherever? I see a comment here about co-working. More and more clients are kind of looking at co-working as an option in kind of that ecosystem too. So thinking about it holistically and just instead of about the managed space, I think more and more clients are doing.
And so I guess along the lines of allowing employees to have a voice and be part of the conversation. One of the things that we did early on is we recognized that it was challenging, and that once we realized that also that this work from home scenario was going to be longer lasting. We launched a survey to all of our employees, and we literally asked them, we know it's challenging. What are the top 3 things that would be helpful for you to navigate this environment? In many cases, what we saw was that employees were not comfortable. They were sitting on kitchen chairs all day long, or they didn't have good audio, or their Wi-Fi signals were not great, and so they were dropping meetings. And then actually one of the other big things we saw was the childcare. There's a lot of working parents out there that, especially when kids were not at school, they're managing crazy schedules. 2 working parents, and you have 2 or 3 kids that are supposed to be doing online learning. And so there's two initiatives that came from that survey that have been really well received. So one was we gave a stipend for home office or wellness purchases. So many employees went out and they got a nice desk chair. I personally got Google Match so that my Wi-Fi signal in my office was stronger, so my meetings would be more productive. We had employees do things like buy another monitor so they could have 2 screens at home, or we even shipped employees some hardware that we already had at the office that they could have access to. And then so the thing that was interesting about all that is that those were extremely well received things, and it was really not a very difficult thing for the company to do, but it came from the employees themselves raising their hand and saying, hey, these are the things that are most important to us. I found that to be a really great program that we did. I'm glad it was something that we implemented.
Yeah, I love this whole question and the transition, because if you think of how the industry has kind of been turned on its head the past 9 months, like a good real estate team is one that says like, we will do whatever we need to do to ensure that you have the tools and set up to get your job done safely and efficiently. And the definition of what that is now is completely different. It's to your point, Rocky, mobile technology, it's home setup and ergonomics. But then now we're hearing things like support for mental health and wellness. What are doing when people are in the office or out of the office? You know, now we're being asked questions about like tax implications and regulatory implications, and how can we make people feel safe on their whole journey? So and I mean, aside from the fact that we're all supposed to be CDC specialists now. So it's an entirely different discussion than we used to have. And I think the expectations of the team is very different. And, you know, here we've set up a working group with HR and legal and corporate security and our communications team and risk and all the regulatory bodies, so that we are one team and like we have never been so integrated. But it's also very interesting to think moving forward when you have real estate professionals, like I don't think it's anymore like, are you, you know, well experienced in lease transactions? Now it's a whole different kind of area of expertise that we need to at least be able to respond to and to understand how to get the right people in the room if we are not the right people in the room. But I think it's a very exciting time to be in our industry and to see kind of the new place we have at the table moving forward.
Kind of an addendum to that question. So someone, and Kylie, you touched on this, someone specifically asked, like, is a nice middle ground co-working? So want to specifically hear your feedback on that. I think where that's stemming from is, and it's kind of cool because we, as an example, Density has a client where we monitor 90 of their buildings across the US. And whereas all of their urban buildings used to be just off the charts attended, they had great utilization, and their suburban spaces, they really struggled with getting people into those spaces. They were just less attractive, I guess, from a commuter standpoint. They wanted to be where the action was. Now it's the opposite. Their suburban centers are bursting and they're trying to offset people to be going back into the urban areas. Kind of separate sidebar on that. I think my opinion relative to the co-working is it offers great flexibility because you can have several satellite or micro offices. The challenge is that you lose control of that space. You're sort of at the whim of that third-party service provider. And a great example, Density, and I won't say who it was, but we used to office in one of our cities in a co-working space. And amid the pandemic, there was a COVID positive test on our floor. And we were assured by that provider that every office had been sanitized just because we didn't know how it was spread at the time. This was in late March. And because we are a people counting company, we were able to prove that no one had been in our space. And so no cleaning had taken place. And yet there was this sort of public assertion that everyone was safe and you could come back to the office and use the space. And so, you know, thinking about measures of control and bringing people safely back to the office and what's going to be really critical, obviously the first 6 months of bringing people back, we're going to be hyper-focused on making sure everyone stays healthy in order to instill employee confidence. I'm curious what all of your opinions are about that question of, is co-working kind of the middle ground answer to help solve for some of these problems? You're closer to daycare, you don't have to take public transit, all that good stuff.
I think it's going to be one strategy that companies use. I don't know that it, you know, I think it's like more companies are looking at how they can fit the different aspects to suit the needs and the strategy. I mean, even before the pandemic, we saw a lot of people use co-working as if they were moving into a new market, they set up a co-working and they had people come and use that type of space. I mean, I think there's a lot of benefits. You know, we're going to see people want workplaces that, you know, you talked about thriving workplace that are more resilient. So how they can kind of scale up and scale down. And I think co-working is a great part of that as one strategy. I don't know that many companies are going to choose it as their only strategy, but I think it's going to fit into it. I mean, it has its challenges. I sit in a co-work, like you, Laura, I sit in a co-working space for a long time. The challenge are also not only about the space, but it's also about, you know, that thing we talked about earlier, the culture. In that, you know, when I was having a really intense time because everyone at my company was working on something, you know, the person that sat next to me was working for a different company that was having, like, you know, they were having a party. So like one of the great things about most companies is like when you're when you're with a team that's your team, you're going through the same events at the same time. When you're in a co-working space, one person could be, you know, really deep in their work and like have 3 or 4 intense weeks of, getting ready for a project, while the person sitting next to them might be having, they're in their social time of their company. So I think there's different challenges that people need to think about when they're looking at co-working or shared space or mini offices as like as a strategy in their portfolio.
I guess to reinforce that, so within Envoy we have several offices. Some of them are fully ours, and we have total control over. And then we have 2 offices that are co-working spaces. And in one geo, the co-working space concept did not work out at all, or it didn't work out as well as we expected. I shouldn't say not at all. It was still a successful group of people, and there was some positivity about it. But there was another office where it was a co-working space, and it was wildly successful. And I would say the difference really came down to control and how much of control we had in our space, and then in control to the amenities. So in one co-working space, they provided all the technology, they provided the Wi-Fi signal, a bunch of other things. Whereas in the space, and that ended up not being such a great environment, and especially when it came to booking conference rooms and not being able to to have access to those things when you needed it. The other location is a co-working place, but we were able to lease a part of it that was our own conference room. And then we were also able to put in our own Wi-Fi. We were also able to put in our own access control doors, so that we can control access in and out of those facilities. And then we were also able to come in and put our own furniture, decals, and really make it feel like it's our own space. So I would say I agree. I don't think it's going to be one or the other. I think there's going to be mix and match. And I think it really depends more on if you do co-working. It depends on the setup of that co-working space. In Kansas City, we looked at 5 different ones. The one we selected ended up being excellent, but some of the others were more like what you said. It was like you're at a desk and there's 8 people next to you, and they're all different companies. So, my experience has been it really depends on the space and how much control you have over it versus whether it's co-working or not co-working.
We've found co-working spaces to be most successful when you're trying to break people away from doing the work the way they always do work. Like when we make it more of like an innovation hub, that's when the co-working space is best received. When it's like, oh no, this is just a different place to do your job the way you would do it at your desk or at home. It just doesn't catch on. There are too many challenges we have from like a security and regulatory perspective. We lose the culture, and then you start to kind of lose the employee once you lose the culture. So it's best when it's more strategic than just another option.
All right, last question, then we're going to get into the Q&A. This is kind of a general question, but we're living through the largest change agent as a workforce in history. What scares you and what are you excited about? And you can take this personally, or you can take it through the lens of the industry. Like the industry is rapidly evolving amid this, and there's some really amazing things and some really scary things that are collateral damage from that.
I can take this one and I'll take it from a personal. What scares me is I don't want to do this forever. I don't want to be on Zoom I'm happy that there's going to be a balance someday, because I think it's great, but I think people are just exhausted. There's many things that make people exhausted right now, but I think, finding a balance of the people connection and finding a way to get away from Zoom or whatever technology platform you use, so that you're always on screen. I think it scares me that people always need to be on in that environment. And I don't think a lot of people do their best work when they're on. So they need time to kind of step away and to pause and to really study their work. Many other things, but maybe I'm just feeling the fatigue today, but that's the one thing that I think, we need to make sure that we give people places, because meetings are so important. And that's the one question we get, but we really need to focus on giving people space and to step away from that.
Yeah, for myself, I think it's similar to what I was saying earlier, just the way, the role of the real estate individual is changing, I think is interesting. And Kylie, to your point, exactly, like we have a new place in the culture discussion where, if you go back a couple years, like the open workplace discussions around does that ruin or destroy culture or make culture, and all that got so like tiring to hear like the same back and forth. And it was it was such a like a shallow discussion. And now I think people are understanding the impact of space. And at the same time, like we are being asked for more and we are delivering a different service that I just, it's very fast moving, which is both exciting and scary. I think in the long run though, it will be a very positive transition for the industry. But yeah, the culture piece, it's like, if we don't get it right now, if we don't figure it out soon, we're just going to start losing people. And in a year from now, any progress we've made during COVID is just going to go backwards.
Workplace was kind of underappreciated, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And now everyone's just so hungry for it. And I think there's such renewed appreciation for how that enhances your work experience.
Yep. Yeah. It's very true.
What I was gonna add here is that, you know, because of my role, I get to speak with literally hundreds of companies, and in many cases, it's real estate and facilities leaders. And the thing that I think is extremely exciting about this time, and an interesting trend, and I think Allison, you touched on it earlier, is the role of workplace or real estate or facilities, however it's defined within that organization. We're seeing these folks now become part of larger teams that are across executive leadership. So now, you know, before we're, you know, facilities and real estate professionals, you know, may have had a harder time, you know, getting buy-in from the CIO or from IT for help for projects, or from the employee health and safety team. Now they're working collaboratively together, and they're saying, okay, you know, here's the larger thing we're trying to solve for, and here's how we can do it in this area, and here's what kind of help I need over here. And here's the impact. And these teams are like, they're actually accomplishing pretty incredible things in a much more rapid pace. Things like hot desking. You know, I had a conversation last week with a retail organization, and there was 2 new projects. So one is they've been wanting to test and, you know, do hot desking and shared spaces for literally years, but they were told that it'll happen eventually. With this, you know, with the way the world is now they're able to launch and actually, you know, go forward with that project and, you know, provide that capability to their employees. At the same time, they're adding new types of screening tools to their retail operations. Whereas before, that was something that was, you know, the retail was separate, you know, they manage their own things, but now they're able to come together and provide these holistic solutions that I think will be much better for the employees, both from a safety standpoint, but also just from a making work more efficient standpoint. So to me, that's some of the most exciting stuff that's happening in the world today, at least from the customers that I'm talking to.
And I think real estate sometimes gets a bad rap about innovating or evolving very slowly. And I mean, Allison, you were super honest at the top of the call saying like over 8 years, we weren't really able to push the envelope, but the reality is they can only evolve as fast as the teams that they serve will allow them to. And so that's a really interesting point, Rocky, of they now kind of are given leave to make these huge leaps.
Yeah. Well, I think what's also, you know, to pick up on what Allison said and Rocky said, and I know we have some questions, but what's really exciting about all of this is I think more and more companies are taking it into account how the workplace is a business tool. So they're bringing it in and thinking of it as a tool that can inform and help their business, and then looking at using it as part of their toolkit. It's not the only thing in that toolkit, you know, understanding how different elements is, but looking at when people come into my managed workplace, what's the business that I need to happen there, and how do I use that to really facilitate and grow my business?
So we did a good job throughout this of attacking a bunch of the questions as they came up, but there's a couple ones that we haven't gotten to yet that we'll try to address in the next 10 minutes here. The first one is, what would be key considerations or opportunities for completely reimagining existing physical spaces? Will the workforce of 2030 be completely different than what we know now? So I think this person's like, okay, what is this new hybrid world? Like, be very descriptive, I guess, and like, it's all free address. We have a employee experience app where they book in the morning. Like, take them through the employee journey and how they would need to retrofit their existing space. And maybe I'll throw this to you first, Kylie.
You know, I would say that I think we've been hearing about there will be no office I think there was like Sun Microsoft, or, you know, when that campus went, the tech boom, you know, people said we'd work from our cars. So like making big predictions that there won't be a workplace, we'll all work from we'll all work from home by 2030. I don't think that's going to happen. People realize that the workplace is really important in that conversation. I think we're going to be in this hybrid blended experience where more people will work from home a few days a week. And then some people will still continue to come into the office. I mean, we still have clients that we're talking to that want a very physical first environment, where some people can come. And then we have other clients that we're talking to that really, really want to go more digital and have what you talked about are those collaborative hubs where they just bring people together to have collaboration. So I really think it's going to depend on the business, like it was kind of before the pandemic, but we're going to see more and more, not to anyone's surprise, more flexibility from how people can work and where they can work. And I'm sorry, my son is starting to come in here. So.
And Kylie, to that point, I don't think people, when they would say like the office is dead, really gave enough value to how important the office is for people's mental health. Like
Yeah.
People need to go into the office, not even just to do like their job, but to like see people and like, and now you're seeing like the office can't be dead because you'll lose your company. So
Yeah.
it's completely agree with you.
Well, I think people, residential real estate's booming right now because people hate their homes. They're tired of spending time in their homes, so they're looking for other places. So I think that tells you how important the office is, that people want to get out and get away from their environment. I know, I spend a lot of time in my house and I do more dishes and I just want to leave my house so I don't have to do dishes.
This is a pretty tactical question, but do any of the panelists know which technology and cameras and microphones are shaping up to be the best options and the most popular with IT teams looking to implement hybrid meeting requirements?
We did, and if I can send or put a link in here, we did. It depends on what your meeting space, just like normal meetings, hybrid meetings come in all shapes and sizes. So it really depends on how you're collaborating. But in the hybrid meeting guide, we did a kind of comparison of the different cameras that are out there and to the advantages that they have. So I can put a link in the chat here of where that is, so that people can download that if they're interested.
All right. Do you consider the US is really only catching up with the agile workplace and workplace as a destination? Because that's been happening in Europe and Australia for many years. Will you finally get rid of the hierarchical office and cube concept? So we've kind of already touched on this, but like, is there still going to be some sort of vestige of that? Or are we really going to see a dramatic change when we all go back to the office?
In talking to my colleagues in the UK and Germany and, Asia and Australia, it's interesting because I think, although on the surface, it looked like the US was so far behind, when you start to get to the higher part of the hierarchy, like senior leadership in other regions, there's still like that tie of like the office and the ivory tower and all of that. So I think although we are catching up from like the lower tranches of the hierarchy and having a more open workplace and all that, they're also coming down to our level as well. So I think there's a little bit more of a leveling out than is always spoken about.
Yeah, I mean, I get, like I said, I get an opportunity to speak with a lot of companies, and to some degree, it depends on the industry too. So I would say, in many of the industries, particularly like, entertainment and technology, I mean, these have been open, collaborative environments for like literally, 10 years. So I think there's pockets, where, that may be the case, but I also think a lot has to do less about geography and more about the industry and how quick they are to adopt new trends or pioneer new things. I mean, when I worked at one company, we had a slide in our lobby that went from the third floor all the way down to the lobby. So, and that was like 7 years ago. So I think it has to do with more about, not that was a great idea. It was just something kind of cute and funny and part of the design. My opinion probably would be that it's probably more based on industry than it is geography. But you guys are more of the experts in that area than I am.
Well, and I think the tone set from leadership, I think that's the other piece of it that makes a huge difference.
Okay, someone said, for density, how are customers using technology beyond initial assessment to understand space utilization and then planning? What are the ongoing use cases that are enabled by density? Quick answer to that is we integrate with any company that's able to receive an open API. So beyond, and I wouldn't say that, and hopefully Allison, you'll agree with this, understanding space utilization isn't something that happens in a vacuum. Offices are living, breathing things. And so if you're going to do a temporary study and then assume that you have, your roadmap for the next however many years relative to how to manage your space, you're probably going to be in for a rude awakening. And so that is an ongoing investment that sort of endures over time. But beyond that, through integrations with all of those other companies through our API, while you're collecting that behind the scenes utilization data, you also are, providing real-time availability of rooms and desks for your employees through the employee amenity app. You're telling them how busy the cafeteria space is. You're letting them know when they may want to go for lunch because the queue is short. You're integrating with your building management system to regulate your mechanical and HVAC to respond to occupancy. So there's all these other like fun elements that happen just in behind the scenes that help to enhance the investment. So hopefully that answered your question. Seems that onboarding is challenging without a place. Should that get better post-pandemic? Or I think this person's saying like, without an office, it's really hard to grow your team and bring people into your new culture. Do we anticipate that that's going to be better with a place for people to convene? Maybe I'll throw that to you actually, Rocky.
Yeah, I would say, being that, I'm at a company that's pretty distributed and, and even in my career, I've worked at a number of tech companies that kind of have had this spoke and hub model pretty commonly. The things that we have adopted, when it's been successful is that we have technology that really lends itself to onboarding. And whether that's, things like Guru or, wikis that you have, documentation set up, but also LMSs like WorkRamp or Lessonly or Cornerstone on Demand, where you actually have a curriculum and, you work people through that onboarding in a consistent manner so that they don't have a different experience than the employees that may be in person. And so the way we do our onboarding is, whether you're remote or in person, you have the same meeting and you're in the group together and you go through the exact same sessions, and it's a curriculum that is all, in one path. So you're not treated like a secondhand citizen, a second-class citizen because you're remote, and it's not just dropped in your lap and say, hey, go do this on your own. You're actually worked through a full schedule with the employees that are actually on site. So I think a lot of it has to do with the implementation in the program. And then when you build your onboarding, you want to think like, how can I make this an equal experience for both types of employees? And I think that's the important part. It has to be consistent and have some continuity.
Awesome. And with that, we're at the top of the hour. You guys have been so fantastic. I get the pleasure of moderating a lot of panels, and you were one of the most fun. You all got along great and had just like awesome, and I would say very different perspectives to offer. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks for everyone that joined. This will be sent out via Megan on our marketing team. So if you wanted to revisit any of the information shared here or share with any of your team members, you should get that in your inboxes tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.